not sort of intimidate you. If you're too scared to, that's absolutely fine. Oh, you can do what you like. It's still a free country, they tell me. Lovely. Okay, excellent. All right, thank you very much. Right, hello, and welcome to the decision-making meeting for the Cabinet Member of Housing, who is me. So before I begin, I have to run through some fire regulation stuff, so please bear with us. In the interest of safety, if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust fire marshal regulations, because we're in a building run by the Guildhall Trust, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. For those of you who have not attended this committee before, I will explain the running order. I will go through apologies, I will ask for a declaration of interest, because there's always a danger that people involved in decision making may actually benefit from decisions. I'll then explain why we need to omit this from the forward plan, and then pursue a discussion around the development of council homes at Doyle Avenue in Hilsea. What I will do is that I will encourage the officers to initially make representations, sorry for the split infinitive, and then go to various other people along here for their own thoughts before trying to come to a conclusion, ideally based around consensus, and then we all go home. So I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the fact this meeting will be live streamed. There is a camera at the back at a fixed location of this meeting room, and the recording will be on the council's website for posterity. The camera will mainly capture the backs of anybody who wants to make deputations, but there will be some footage of those making deputations as they approach, if anybody wants to do so, and I can see the mass hordes there already. And leave the table where the microphone's located, and also people entering or leaving the room while the meeting is in progress. We have here members of the press and public, so hello to you all, but you can also record the meeting on the understanding it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not want to be recorded. Finally, may I ask everyone to use the microphones provided when they are speaking. So before I begin to the first item of the agenda, it just would be useful again for the camera to work on. Hello, please come in. Welcome. Are you all right? Do you want us to help? Thank you very much. I just want to go around just to introduce everybody who is at this table. We have people at the back who wish to stay at the back, which is entirely their right. So I'll start with Joanne on my right.
John Wild-Smith, Democratic Services.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhoods and Building Services.
Wayne Layton, Finance Manager.
Jo Bennett, Head of Business Relationships, Growth and Support.
Adrian Blackwood, Consortium Link Group.
Maria Cole, Residents Consortium.
Cal Corkery, Labour Party Spokesperson for Housing.
Scott Pector-Harris, Conservative Spokesperson for Housing.
And I'm Darren Sanders, I'm the Liberal Democrat Cabinet Member for Housing. So that's it. Do we have any apologies, Joe?
None, everyone's here.
Excellent. Does anybody have anything interesting to declare? Just to make sure that we can't be seen to be benefiting from anything in front of us. No? Right, okay, that's fine. Sorry, madam, over on my left. Hello, yes, you with the glasses. Lovely. Could you just tell us who you are, just for the record, please? Thank you, madam.
I'm Mada Abrams. I'm a member of the CLG.
And Ms. Abrams, thank you very much for taking the time to come here. Apologies that we started far too properly for you. So this item was omitted from the forward plan, which is the way in which we normally tell people what's going on, giving 28 days public notice. The chairman of the City Council Scrutiny Management Panel has been notified, a public notice has been published, and the forward plan has been updated to reflect this item. I think for what's about to come and from the discussion people will see, they'll understand why, I hope. So I'm happy to recommend that the omission to this forward plan for July 2019 be noted, and that publication of the omission notice be noted for reasons that will become apparent over the next 15 to 20 minutes. So we then move to item 4, which is the development of council homes at Doyle Avenue. I have a paper from, the name is James, as Director of Housing, Neighbourhoods and Building Services, but whoever wishes to do the presentation and explanation can do so, I don't mind.
Okay, firstly, thank you very much for that. So the report is in my name. There is a minor correction that we wish to draw your attention to. Wayne will talk to that, but I would ask Joe to introduce the report if that's okay, and then obviously very happy to take questions.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Joe.
Thank you. The report is to seek approval to engage the regeneration team to deliver a new development of 16 homes. 9 of these would be in 2-bedroom flats, 3 4-bedroom disabled adapted homes and 4 3-bedroom homes on the site at the corner of Doyle Avenue and Northern Parade. We're seeking approval to build these homes and retain them within the HRA. This development is looking at a capital expenditure of £4.2 million. That would be funded between unsupported borrowing of 2.94 and right to buy receipts of 1.26. We would like delegation to James, the Director of Housing, Neighbourhoods and Buildings, in consultation with Head of Finance, to amend the composition and spending profile of the proposed scheme in order to meet planning and design requirements, and would like approval for the financial element of this. It's based on a 30-year HRA business plan. We'd also like approval to start immediate consultation with relevant stakeholders to ensure the community are engaged and informed about this development. So the background to this site, the vacant site that this is coming onto was previously the site of the Adult Social Care Day Centre, and was demolished in 2011 to make way for the Maritime House development. This area of the site that we're talking about wasn't needed for that development, and so subsequently, 15th of November 2011, a minute was approved approving appropriation of this previous PCT and Northern Parade Day Centre site into the HRA to make way for 14 affordable homes. The site offered a good development opportunity and is a good development site, but at the time the borrowing cap on the housing revenue account meant that it wasn't prudent to bring forward the development with the borrowing cap in place, and the removal of the borrowing cap has since allowed us to proceed with this development. The site was also then included in the 5 sites proposal that went to Cabinet in October 2018, and that was on the 9th of October 18. We then, though, on the 30th of October, had the removal of the borrowing cap, which allowed us to then bring this forward as an HRA development, and what we would like to do is to bring this forward to meet our most urgent housing needs. The removal of the site from the 5-site development portfolio has no financial consequence to the remaining sites. The makeup of the build recommended for this site has come from the areas of priority on our waiting list. So the makeup suggested offers a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom general need accommodation, which are our highest general need demand, and then it also allows for allocation of 4 homes for those with accessible housing needs. So those would be adapted properties. The disabled adapted properties will be allocated to specific families and be specifically designed for their particular need. It's a reality that people with an adapted need can face a long wait on our waiting list, as there are limited properties available within the city to meet those needs. Those properties are then also exempt for right to buy. There is a small block of flats within this development, so it's a block of 9 2-bed flats, and these are much needed family homes, but I'm mindful to just draw attention to the fact that whilst this block of flats in itself doesn't have any outdoor communal area, the location of the site is directly across the road from Alexandra Park and in close proximity to the Hillsey Lions parks, etc. So whilst I appreciate having a block of flats with no immediate garden is not ideal, the location of this development does make it something that I feel meets those needs. The financial appraisal for the development uses a model with rents set at affordable levels. This means, from our perspective, that rents would be set at a maximum of local housing allowance rate. During the detailed work to prepare the design and the cost for this development, we would be able to look at the assessment and possibility of reducing the rent to a different level. That would, of course, only be possible if the development remained cost-effective once appraised, as indicated in the beginning of the report. Allocation to the development will include affordability checks to ensure that rent level is affordable for the tenants moving into the scheme, and will ensure that no one will move into any property which they cannot afford. We're also mindful in this to think about the climate emergency declared by full council in March 19 and the ongoing commitment to improved air quality, and will be considered considering in this design the lowest practical impact on carbon and nitrogen dioxide emissions. So the design and build would mitigate the energy demand of the development and show us hopefully leading the way in that type of development. We'll look at technologies such as solar PV, battery storage, heat pumps to mitigate the need for things such as gas boilers, etc., and ensure that where power and heat is required by the dwellings, as much of it as possible is derived from renewables. So the reasons for the recommendations are as laid out. They are to add much needed homes to the HRA and also the provision of the disabled adapted accommodation, allowing for a tailored form of housing that we have a limited amount of, retaining that stock within the housing revenue account.
Lovely, thank you for that, Joe. Wayne, you had a further comment on the money, I understand.
Oh, sorry.
So in section 7.1, there's a table, and I think there's some version control issues here where throughout the report we refer to the cost of the bill being 4.2. In that table it says it's 3.8, so that's incorrect. So basically the cost is 4.2 million. 2.94 will be provided by unsupported borrowing and 1.26 in right to buy receipts. So as I say, right the way through the report it's correct, except in that table. It also, from a finance perspective, because we're borrowing 2.94 to build this, we have to do it prudentially, so it has to be affordable and sustainable, which is why the report says we've got a viable scheme if we rent this at an affordable rent capped at the local housing allowance rate. But if, as we go through the development, we're able to make it cheaper, we are able to then flex the rent somewhere between social and affordable. So what the report says at the moment is we cannot do it at this rate at 100% social. We can definitely do it at 100% affordable. Where we'll end up when the development is completed is somewhere between the two.
Thank you for that, Wayne. Joe, can I suggest that those comments are added to the record of the meeting? Just to confirm that. So that the unsupported borrowing with £2.94 million with £1.26 million in terms of right to buy receipts, and that's amending the table on page 8. Okay. Officers, is there anything else you wish to say about this? No? Right, I'll move to stakeholder colleagues, starting, if I may start with Mrs. Abrams and then work all the way up. So Mrs. Abrams, please, your thoughts, if any. I would be very grateful if you could use the microphone. I want to make sure, just in case some people are hard of hearing, not least me.
Yeah, I think the plan is good, and I think if we borrow some money, it will fulfill the plans, and once it's done, maybe the people who will occupy the place, the flats or places, will be, I think the council will be able to overcome everything.
That's fine. If you could say as much or as little as you like, Mrs. Abrams, don't worry. Is that it from you?
Pardon?
Is that everything you wanted to say about this? If it is, that's fine. If not, it's fine.
Because all the plans here were all agreeable, and I think it will do good for the community, for the Portsmouth City Council and the community.
That's fine, Mrs. Abrams. Thank you very much. Sir?
Thank you.
Not at all.
Yeah, I'm very pleased to see that these disabled homes are going up. I'm disabled myself, so it's just very pleasing to see the disabled homes. That's all I've got to add.
Thank you. I like this. God, you should come to council meetings. I'll be over quicker. I tell you, thank you much. Maria?
Very sorry, Chair. I've got quite a few bits and pieces.
Don't be sorry. It's fine. It's okay.
First of all, I've got a query about 3.3. As a member of the consortium and the CLG, I'd never heard of the Radlin Housing Company. So I did actually look up the cabinet meeting to find out a bit more about it. I am surprised that it's never been mentioned at consortium, because it actually does, I think, affect consortium members and certainly the CLG. One of my questions has actually been answered by my research. Did the remaining 4 sites actually form the Ravelling company? So obviously they did. So that's okay. Right, I'll go on to 3.6. I do think it is really good, but we're actually doing something for disabled people, and that it's not just for single disabled people, it will be for families. Because I think certainly since we've signed for the Forces Covenant, it's especially important that we think about families in regard to disability. 3.7, the disabled adapted homes will be allocated to specific families. Have those families already been identified?
Yes.
Right, that's fine, thank you. 3.8, if there are no outdoor gardens, will there be at least room for drying space so that people don't have to use tumble dryers and use more electricity?
We're not at that level of design yet. We would obviously aim to, and as I say, we've been looking at the impact that this development will have on climate, so we would hope so.
Thank you. 3.11, yes, I'm very excited, given the carbon neutral that the city's working towards, that you're actually going to be doing all these things that will make these buildings much better for the environment. And I did somehow feel that there was a contradiction. You were saying that all these properties would be coming within the HRA, but the paperwork that I found out about the Ravelling was that some of the property could be privately. It wouldn't always be HRA, so
these properties will be built and retained within the HRA. The question previously is whether or not this site would have been developed through the Ravelling Housing Company.
Right.
This report is confirming that this site will not be developed by the Ravelling Housing Company, and the Ravelling Housing Company won't have any impact on this site.
Right, that's it. Thank you, that's...
Thanks for that, Maria. Cal?
Yeah, if I could just start with a quick question, a point of clarification. You talked about there potentially be a point or a series of points in the process where it's possible to go back and review the levels at which rents are set. So I just wanted to get a better understanding at which points that review would be possible.
So effectively there'll be a point where this design needs to go into planning, and the delegation that we've asked for to look at composition and design is about ensuring that we reach planning conclusion. We would need to know what we were building before we can enter into the contract, so planning is before that point. Once we know what the contract price is and what the planning requirements have been and any amendments, we'll know what the final build cost for this build will be, and that will be the point pretty much as soon as the contract's on site that we'll know what rent we can afford to charge. There will be a caveat that if there are significant, I don't know, if we dig in the ground and find enormous issues and have to vary the budget, then there could be a further impact on the rent levels achievable. But we would initially get a good point of reference at the point that we're going into contract.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to make a couple more kind of general observations and then a suggestion, if I may. So I'm really glad to see that we're bringing forward adaptive properties, obviously with specific families in mind that have got a high need for disabled adaptive properties, and as has been explained, and I think a lot of people recognise it's a real gap in the market where the private sector is failing to deliver for people, so that is a really important role for the council to really be stepping in and delivering homes for those families. I'm also glad to see that it's 100% rented housing on site. As Maria discussed, previous plans for the site included quite a significant percentage, I think maybe half, was planned to potentially be private flats, which I think a lot of people would find disagreeable on council lands. I do believe that on public lands and council land we should be delivering social housing only, wherever possible. in terms of the rent levels, this is something I've got significant concerns around, and I know I've had these discussions already, but I did want to flesh out just another quick question. The figures that were given to us, presumably they're not confidential. You said that they're publicly available information anyway. Okay. So the figures that were given to us in terms of potential rents that aren't in the report, so if these were traditional social rent properties, so the kind of sort of tenure and price that council tenants would be used to and have traditionally been provided by the local authority, a two-bed flat would be let at £358.22 a month, and a four-bed house would be let at £461.45 a month. However, under the current proposal we have before us, it uses the Tories' redefinition or bogus definition of what is actually affordable. So instead, what we're seeing is two-bed flats let at potentially £578.96 per month, and a four-bed house let at £1,012.53 per month. So the flat is almost double, the house is more than double what the traditional council rent would be. So I think we need to think through what the implications of that are going to be. I know it's been talked about there would be affordability checks before people move into these properties, but anyone that has any kind of regular dealing with social housing tenants or people that are having to claim benefits know that people's circumstances change. So it's quite possible that a family move into the property, there's one of the parents is disabled, the other parent is a carer, they've got 3 children, they move into the 3 or 4 bed house. It's fine because they've got disability benefits, they've been recognised as being generally disabled. A couple of months after moving in, they have their disability benefits reviewed, and the DWP, being the DWP, takes them away. All of a sudden, their household income has decreased massively, they're now subject to the benefit cap, and there's a massive shortfall in their rent, which not only puts the family at severe hardship, also puts them at risk of homelessness, lands a massive problem on the local authority's lap. So that's, I think, something quite important that we need to be considering going forward. And it has to be remarked that other local authorities seem to have found a way, since the housing revenue cap, borrowing cap has been removed, to provide significant levels of housing at social rents. There's a story trailed quite recently in the media around Norwich, where they're delivering, I think, over 100 new homes to very high energy efficiency standards, apparently enabled through the removal of the HRA borrowing cap, all at social rent, all at traditional social council rents. So my question here is, has the administration done all within its power to ask the question and ensure that we're getting rents at the most generally affordable levels? And I'm not convinced that is the case at the moment. So what I would like to do is suggest an amendment to the report, if I may. I know it's not technically within my remit, but I'm sure the Cabinet Member for Housing will allow me to put something on the table, is that instead of delegating power for officers to review the rents potentially at some point during the construction process, that we actually bring that decision back to a Cabinet Member for Housing meeting, not because I don't trust the officers, I'm sure they would make very wise decisions on that, but I think there's a significant level of public interest in this, and the decision shouldn't be taken behind closed doors. It should be something that's discussed and debated in a public meeting.
Thank you for that, Cal. The way I like to work is to get everybody involved rather than respond to each individual points, because then that gets us a fair balance going forwards. But I have noted that and all the other points you make, and I may return to that. Now, Scott, just in the interest of openness and transparency, this is in your ward, so you may wish to talk as a portfolio holder or a ward councillor or anything.
I'll probably talk as both, to be honest, Aaron, so thank you for that. I'm not going to get into the politics of it. I'm just going to talk about the purpose of the report, because that's why we're here, effectively. So on 2.13, it's probably a question for yourself, James. It says about in consultation with the Head of Finance on Section 151 officer to amend the composition and the spending profile. Can you just clarify what the composition actually covers? Does that cover the actual build, or does that cover the materials? Because obviously composition could be used in 3 or 4 different ways.
So the composition is we need to make sure that the properties that we've got on that site actually fit on the site, which will come through in the detailed design. So what we're looking at is, as you look at family number 1, 2 and 3 for those large 4 beds, depending on the size of the adaptations needed, will just depend on the size of the properties actually needed. So what we could find is that we don't actually have enough room for everything on the site.
So the development could change, Joe, is that what you're telling me?
It could change, but only down.
Okay, can't go any higher up?
No.
Okay, that's fine. That's great. Anyway, I'm going to just run through this, going to go through point by point.
Sorry, can I just stand as well? The
course you
reason
can,
why the Section 151 officer is on there is that if that composition changes, we still have to bring it back to make sure it's viable so we can use borrowing.
Absolutely, yeah, no, it's for the potential borrowing, I know that. 3.3 is about the Ravelin housing. I wasn't going to bring this up until Maria actually mentioned it, because I think you make a really good point on Ravelin about the fact that nobody knows what it's doing, and it's one of my key bugbears, to be honest, that it's there, has 4 sites now, and apparently this was going to be for 58 one-bedroom homes, and I'm really grateful that it's within the HRE now, because it's actually been looked at in a correct manner. So I think that's something for yourself to bring back to us, Darren, and give us some more information on Ravelin. I think it would be wise for this committee especially, myself and Cal, to actually have a look at those numbers. And I can only really say thank you to the guys on the other side of the table for keeping me informed on this development, especially James and Joe. So I'm going to move on to 3.7. Disabled adapted homes. And this is probably a question for yourself, Joe. How much does it cost currently to adapt a home?
It's a bit of a, I'm not avoiding the question, it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string.
Okay.
So,
Give me an average.
Well, so if what you were looking at, for example, was, say, a shower, grab rails, then you'd be looking at below £5,000. If you were looking, though, at the level of adaptation we're talking about here,
Whole home.
yeah, and we're talking about the capacity for people to cook, to be an active participant in their home, and the benefit of a new build disabled adapted home is that it incorporates the life of that individual throughout the property. Unfortunately, sometimes we aren't able to do that because we're adapting a home that someone currently lives in. So a disabled adapted home is great in that someone can access all parts of the home, they can be an active member of that household, they should be able to get around the whole house and actively either parent or live within the home.
Okay, it's just a point on the cost, because obviously adapting a home that's already built is going to cost significantly more than building a new one. Is that what you'd probably say to me?
What I would say to you is that I can't say that, because what you do when you adapt an existing home is that you do the best that you can within the confines of a building that's already there. So what you may find is that the same family would end up with just an adapted extension.
It doesn't meet the needs that the family actually
A
need.
disabled home that's built for that disabled person will meet the home and will be designed to meet the whole life of that person within that
That's
home.
fine. I have to say this is the really, as the ward councillor and as the opposition spokesperson, I feel quite positive about this use for the site. You know, and it's something that me and Darren have spoken about previously when I had concerns about 58 one-bedroom homes being built, and I had residents emailing me, phoning me, petitioning me constantly. So I want to say thank you to Darren and thank you to yourselves over there for actually looking into that. The 9-bedroom flats, I did mention previously about assisted living. Is that an option for that, or for an elderly generation, because it would fit quite well within the locality of the Coronation Home site?
We haven't specifically looked at the end use. What I would say to you is that this site composition has come from the waiting list, and at the moment 2 and 3 bedroom homes are in significant demand. Obviously everybody here will know how long the life of the development is, and so what we may find is that by the time this development comes to be allocated, the highest demand may be for 2 bedroom adapted need. It's unlikely though, and these are 2 bedroom property. Most of our accommodation for older people would be a 1 bedroom property.
Yeah.
So by them being 2 bed, I think it's most likely that these would be for general needs families.
I say that because I have the sensitivities of Maritime House next door.
Of course.
So, you know, it's on that site as well, and that is a site that is constantly in flux as well, with people obviously seeing some of their family members in the end of their lives. So I'm very conscious of those sensitivities, and I think it was something that we should obviously talk about and make a note of. What else have I got? I've got another one. Oh, that's it really. That's all I've got. But I like this much more than I like the original Ravelin idea, and I think residents will buy into this a lot more than they would have bought into 58 bedroom properties and being on a mixed tenure. So I think this is a much better use of the site. And also, you made note earlier of the amenities around the area. We've got lots of local parks. You've got Park at Mount Centre. You've got one down at Spinnaker Drive. You've got the Alexandra Park site. If you go the other way, you can go to Gatcombe Park as well. So there are a lot of amenities in the local area.
Thank you for that, Scott. After that bell's now chimed. If I may, colleagues, I will ask a few questions as well, if that's okay. Firstly, I want to pick up some of the points, the questions that Cal raised. Firstly, with Ravelin House, I'd be delighted to recirculate the published Cabinet report on Ravelin Housing. You've read it?
I need more information on that.
Okay. If colleagues would be happy to almost let me know, and then we can see what we can do. My knowledge of Ravelin is this is something that was building up under the previous administration, and if there was secrecy around that, I'm disappointed because we have to be as open as possible, and I'd be delighted to do that.
Darren, it's more to the point that, sorry to interrupt, it wasn't the fact that it was more formed under the previous administration. I think you guys have actually moved on with it.
Okay.
So we are not sure about where it's going.
Okay, that's fine.
It's more about we know it's there, what's the destination and who's driving the car.
Okay, well, considering it can't drive, it won't be me. But I'm more than happy to open that up to colleagues, and I think we will have a discussion about that. Certainly, it's been something that's been talked about for years. I know it was essentially a way of getting around the government's idiotic borrowing cap that was put in place by governments of all political persuasions until the last one removed it, which I think is one of the best things that particular government did. But you're right about how it goes forwards, and I think I'm happy to talk with James and colleagues as to ways that we can publish that. I think we've got to be as open as we can on it, and also open on what it can and can't do. Because there's certainly been legal opinion on what it can and what it can't do, and whether we publish the full-on legal opinion, I've got no idea. But I think there's no harm in being as open as possible, obviously within the confines of commercial confidentiality, and I'll discuss that with James when I see him in the morning, if that's all right, all 5 colleagues, because I think there's no harm in that. So we'll have a look at that. Thank you for that, Scott. I just wanted to pick up some of Cal's points and just ask a few questions about it. Cal mentioned a whole raft of social rent levels. Are the figures he's talking about rent levels that factor in the Tory 1% cut in rents that has existed over the last few years? Does anyone know? Because I think they do. In other words, they are the current social rent levels.
They're a current local housing allowance.
So the current rent, the social rent levels, yes? Okay, because
HA rate, not social rent.
Okay, so the lower figures Cal talked about are essentially the social rent levels that would currently exist. That is correct.
So those would be the formula grant.
That would be the formula. Okay. Sorry, this sounds a fairly archaic point for those watching on the television. It's just over the last few years the government has chosen to reduce social rents by 1% each year, when every council of every political party would want to put it up by what the government is now proposing, which is the retail price index plus 1%. So therefore the actual rents that councils would have charged, social rent, Cal, that they would have charged, would be a bit higher, I think, than those figures you were talking about. I don't think that negates some of the things you were saying, but it just makes the gap a bit wider than I think it should be. Are we saying in this meeting that, because there's another point that he raised essentially, which is anybody who goes in only if they can afford it, but Cal's point seemed to be that if their circumstances changed, they'd get evicted. Have I got that right? That would be helpful, because that's what I read into it.
Okay, so the point I was making is that someone could be moved into one of these properties at the higher so-called affordable rents, their circumstances then change, it then will become unaffordable for them, there would be a significant shortfall in their rent, which they're unlikely to be able to make up from their other benefit income, and therefore that would potentially put them at risk of homelessness. I don't expect the council would actually evict that person. I expect they would seek to move them to a property that would be genuinely affordable. My point was, why not put them in a property that's genuinely affordable in the first place?
That sounds like yes to me, but I mean, I'd be grateful for some clarification on that, if there is any. Colleagues.
I mean, I think across the whole housing stock, when people's circumstances change, there are conversations with the housing officers around what that means to their financial position, and there are circumstances in which we would support people to have what we call a management move around the stock to ensure that they can maintain a tenancy elsewhere. Change of circumstances is bread and butter for a housing service. I accept the point here that the starting position is a different rent level to the rest of the stock. All the new development that's come through recently has been at the affordable level, which is within the local authority housing allowance. And the only way in which we can make this scheme financially viable for today's proposition is to charge that rent level. That's the reality of this small scheme as opposed to what other councils are doing where there may be bulk massing development. I'm not aware of the Norwich piece, but for the financial viability of this scheme, this is the only way in which we can make it financially viable at this point.
Yes, and when you talk about local housing allowance, you actually mean the housing benefit levels, don't you? I'm getting a nod there. That is correct, Wayne, is it? So that's the level of people's housing benefits, basically. That is correct. So the rents that are being initially proposed here will be below the level of housing benefits. Have I got that right?
Right. So the LHA rate determines what they can get in benefits. The rents we're proposing when we do the financial appraisal include the amount of rent we can charge plus the service charge, so that all their housing costs will be met through benefits.
Okay, that's fine. That's particularly important for many people, including the 23% of people who are on housing benefit in the city who work. That's useful to know. I have Cal. Cal. No. I'd be very grateful. Please feel free to email me with that point of clarification, but I get the feeling that you give several good points, some of which I agree with, and I want to come back to my comments on that in a second, because I think it's really interesting, because I do think Cal does have a point. As someone who was brought up in council accommodation in this city, one of the few councillors who was, and who has family who are in council accommodation in this city, one of the few who does, I think it's interesting to see this development in the round, and I want to start with the rent levels. You asked whether we've done all we can in terms of trying to deliver affordability. I think the key thing for me is whether a scheme is viable or not. The end of the borrowing cap is great news, but we have to make sure schemes wash their face. We cannot be losing money on schemes. That said, we have to make sure that the rent levels are as low as possible, consistent with that. And I have been very clear with everyone that that is what we want, and that is what I am expecting. Now, there is a stage whereby we're going to reanalyse the costs to see if they're as low as possible. Now, I have said that for the benefit of the live stream video, and Joe, I would like that in the written record, because I know occasionally if you put it on the live stream, people think it's a verbal pledge. So if that could be put in the written notes, that would be grateful. So as far as I can see, rents have to be as low as possible, provided it's consistent with the scheme's viability. And that's absolutely crucial, because it has to make sure that it washes its face. I want to deal with some of the other points as well that were put forward. Cal, you said that you wanted disabled properties, you wanted all rented levels. That's something that I've been asking for from the start, because we've got to make sure we meet the housing needs of people in this city. I do recognise many tenants are on housing benefit, and therefore for many tenants this will be very, very affordable. And I understand that. I'm pleased with the comments around people with physical disabilities being included with this. I think you're right, that's demand that has been overlooked, and because this is now within the HRA, we can now meet the social housing needs assessment, which means that we can actually look at things in detail and match it up. I'm personally delighted we're able to house people with physical disabilities as a result of this. I'm also delighted that we've got houses back. We need more family homes in the city, and we need more family homes people can afford in the city. And I'm delighted that that exists. It is a lot of money, but I think as Joe has outlined, and I get the feeling one or two of our other councillors not here will immediately talk about the cash costs, but I think the costs particularly of doing new homes for people with physical disabilities is right, and it does cost a lot of money. And I do not want a bodge job, and I do not want low standards. But council tenants deserve the best, as good, if not better, than standards in the owner-occupied sector and the private rented sector, and I think that is worthwhile. The second bit is around the next stage, which is the stakeholder engagement and talking to local people. It is crucial that we do, including Scott and his ward colleagues Donna and Frank as well, around that, as well as with local people, because they're going to be their neighbours. I do though remember growing up in a council flat in Lamport with no balcony, so I vaguely remember that time from when I was young. But I think it is crucial that we make sure we maximise green space, and that might be something we can talk through with other people. The final point in my musings and thoughts are around the environmental issues that Maria raised in particular. This is the first time we've actually, I think as far as I know, we've included any environmental analysis in any report to deal with housing. There will be more. Because certainly I've argued for issues around ecological audits and environmental impact assessments. We know they're going to be difficult, we know they take time, but the first time the environmental impact is assessed, and in every development we do, we've got to do that. We have chosen to put ourselves into a climate emergency. Cal, Scott and I have voted for it. And so we've got to make sure that we minimise the impact in the future. And that's what we will continue to do. So with the written note, not necessarily in the recommendations, but in the written note, that any rent levels would be as affordable as possible, or as low as possible, consistent with ensuring the scheme is viable. I'm happy to take this forwards and build more council homes in our city. Yes.
Because the opposition spokesperson.
One of them.
It was just a final clarification. So the ultimate decision that's made around rent levels, whether they're affordable rent or social rent, will that be taken in a public meeting or behind closed doors and the public not aware?
What is the legal position, colleagues? Because, I mean, there seems to be a whole raft of steps that need to be gone through here, especially if we're going through planning.
The only thing I will say, because I don't know the legal position where the decision could be taken, but the only thing I do know is that whatever we do, in order to use prudential borrowing, we have to have a viable scheme, and that will determine the rent level. We won't be able to borrow the money and do it 100% social if we can't repay our borrowing or service our borrowing. That's the only thing I know. Where the decision gets taken, I must admit I'm not sure. We can come back and clarify that.
The financial viability is one thing. I mean, it's entirely possible. The issue we're trying to avoid is delaying the development by creating a formal step which isn't necessarily required, on the basis that this gives delegations to myself, the Section 151 officer, to do the right thing by the financial viability in consultation with the Cabinet member. We have a regular briefing session, and it's entirely possible, should you wish this, Councillor Sanders, to bring this back to you so that you can see the evolution of this development at that point when we are clear on what the rent levels are going to be. That's also something we can bring to the Residents' Consortium. My only concern, and it's not to avoid it, but if you were to link that back to these formal public meetings, you're introducing then a formal step which could, in the worst case scenario, delay the development unnecessarily. So if you're happy to receive that information through the normal briefing session, we can do that. But you know, we will do as you wish. The legalities are, this report gives the ability to link the rent to the financial viability of the development. That's in there.
I will. We have no legal person here, so I think that might be worth a chat with them. I think the second step is to say, as I have said twice, and will be in the meeting, will be in the written notes, I suspect at least 3 times by the time we finish, is that rent levels will be the lowest possible, consistent with the viability of the scheme. I think I said in line with the viability of the scheme previously, but they're basically the same thing. Because that's right, we need home supports that people can afford. But we also we have to make sure as a responsible landlord that 1, we get these things built as quickly as possible, to as high a standard as possible, and 2, we make sure that rent levels are as low as possible, consistent with the viability of the scheme. Those are the 2 points that I'm keen on, and I'm happy to stress that again, if necessary, because I do have a lot of sympathy with what you're saying, Cal, but I also have to accept that we have to make sure schemes wash their face, because if they don't, council homes don't get built. I have a sneaking suspicion everybody in this room will think that's a bad idea. But I'll check on the legalities and we'll work at it from there. I remain happy to pursue this, and I remain happy that we're now in the process whereby we're building council homes again, which is a good thing. On that basis, I recommend this report goes forwards, and on that basis, I close the meeting at 5:46 p.m. Colleagues, thank you for taking out your Tuesday tea times for me. Thank you.